Hi, folks. Before we get started with this episode, I want to put in a few content warnings. Nestor Makhno's life was fascinating, and he was a really interesting person, but it was also really sad. So, content warning for mental health, war and guns, child abuse, suicide, and death from lung illnesses. Also, not a content warning, but just an FYI, we tried a different recording setup and it didn't work very well. So I tried to clean it up as much as I could, but please forgive some of the messiness in that regard. Okay, here we go. I'd put you in my pocket, push the button through the hole to lock it, hold on to you, you're like a treasure. Walk across my hand, it'd be a pleasure. You could come with me. You could come with me. Oh, you're such a sweet little misfit. When your smile falls down, I wanna lift it. Wanna make you better. Wanna run away together. Welcome to D-Listers of History, a podcast about interesting people you probably didn't learn about in school. This is Fega, your very piano-playing historian, apparently. I'm teaching piano lessons now.
Yes. And I'm Issa. If you look up my name on Google right now, it just says critic. So, according to Google, I am critic.
And we have a guest with us, Charlie Allison, and I literally copied and pasted your bio from the book listing on Amazon.
Yeah, that'll do it.
So Charlie Allison is a writer, researcher, and storyteller based in Philadelphia. Charlie has worked as a gardener, tutor to children with learning disabilities, an English teacher, chess instructor, and as a bureaucrat. He has published short stories in Pickman's Press, Podcastle, and Sea Lion Press. He currently runs his own website at charlie-allison.com, where the genesis for this book, the one we're about to talk about, was formed as a series of YouTube videos with the help of Sewer Rats Productions. He is active in the Philadelphia storytelling and mutual aid communities. Charlie is frequently bullied by his cat in the small hours of the morning, which I think we can all
share hardships in that way, you know.
Yes.
Solidarity. Yeah.
Yes. And the book, I don't have hold on. Longtime listeners know that I'm never prepared. No Harmless Power, The Life and Times of the Ukrainian Anarchist, I don't know how to say his name, Nestor
Makhno.
Makhno. Yeah. Hey, I got it right.
Yay.
Or at least close.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, when I got a reach out about this, I was so excited because this guy is like exactly the sort of person that I always want to cover in this podcast, which is like, if it's a space that you are familiar with in history, there's a lot of information there, but the average, even like person who's interested in history, if it's not your realm, you have no idea who this guy was. Like, I was like, I don't know who this is. He sounds cool. And oh boy, was he a person. He was a whole person. So I said this beforehand, but I'm Russian history, Ukrainian history, not my strong suit. I was thinking about, like, where do I know what I think I know about the Russian Revolution? And I realized it entirely came from two things. The Bluth movie, Anastasia.
I'm about to make that joke.
And weirdly, my middle school went to see an exhibit on the Romanovs. And my school was 40% Jewish, the bulk of which were Ashkenazi Jews. And the entire thrust of this exhibit was like, isn't it so sad what happened to them?
Oh, Lord.
And I know, right? Charlie's making a very good face.
That sure is a
and
position.
at the time, the irony did not occur to me because I was 12 and all I knew about Russian history at that time was Anastasia. So it was like fun singing and dancing and pretty ladies in dresses or whatever.
Fega, quick question.
Yeah.
Will there be an appropriate time in the course of this episode to bring up the Rosh Hashanah cards, making fun of both Alexander and Nikki.
So this might be the time because honestly,
Okay.
Tsar Nicholas does not feature very prominently.
Okay. All right.
He's almost impossible to parody.
So Charlie, judging by the art in this book and other books, I think this is something you'll enjoy. So it is Rosh Hashanah is just past us. We have just gotten past Rosh Hashanah. And one tradition among Ashkenazim in particular is to send Rosh Hashanah cards or Shona Tovos. And they this goes back to like the 1400s in Germany, but in the 1860s, it kind of exploded because the postcard was popularized. And by the 1880s, usually there are just like cards like with rabbis on them or like of like Rosh Hashanah celebrations, like Thanksgiving type, scenes, like people eating dinner, happy, or doing like Rosh Hashanah rituals or whatever. But then they started getting political. And by like I think one of them, so the first one was in the 1889, the New York Yiddish Volkszeitung, the New York like Yiddish workers newspaper, published a print that was made into a Rosh Hashanah card of, I think it was the first one was Alexander II, which was a chicken with his head on it. And then this happened again in 1917. Rosh Hashanah 1917, which, a very pregnant month. And again, it was a rabbi this time holding a chicken with Tsar Nicholas's head on it. And the symbol of the chicken with the head on it means that he is going to practice, kaparot, which is a ceremony where you take a chicken and you swing it above your head, and and you transfer all of your sins from the last year onto the chicken, which is then swung over your head, and then you slaughter it and then give the meat to a needy family. So basically it's all being like, yeah, the Tsar is going to be my kaparot. I will slaughter him and he will be the scapegoat for my sins. And then he was slaughtered, which is great.
Fantastic. That's my new favorite thing I didn't even know I needed to know.
You need to know. You need to see these things. I put out the call, and I now do have an artist called Pomegranate Witch, or I don't know. I have an artist. I know this artist who put Mitch McConnell's head on there. She put, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Elon Musk also. Few good people that could serve as a sacrificial chicken.
Nice.
Solid choices.
That's excellent. Okay. So I have no transition for that, so I'm just going to go into it. So Nestor Makhno was born November 7th, 1888, which I think is our calendar.
Yeah.
For that. There's like different calendars.
Yeah, the traditional Russian calendar, if I'm remembering right, and there's no reason I would remember exactly right, was 3 weeks ahead, and there was a huge amount of confusion during the revolutions of what calendar are we using? So it's a little bit awkward.
It's like Betsy Ross was born like the first day of the new setup of our calendar, which is just a weird little tidbit that has nothing to do with this. So he was born in November 7th, 1888, to a poor peasant family, and we're going to try.
Hulia, if I'm saying it right, which I'm not sure.
Hulia. Well, we're going to go with that.
Yep.
Which at the time was a part of the Russian Empire. Now that area is Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And his parents were former serfs. They were emancipated in 1861. This is one of those things that I should know more about than I do.
It's pretty similar to Reconstruction, or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
But with feudalism.
They were like attached to the land in the way that like peasants in Western Europe would have been, right?
Yeah. The only difference was, so Makhno's mother and father had both been serfs at one point. So 1861 rolls around, serfdom's abolished. Well, all right, that sounds pretty good. But much like with Reconstruction, abolished, asterisk, you can still hire back your old serfs for, pennies on the dollar functionally. And so serfdom's gone, but wage labor is the new hotness, baby.
Woo
It is
woo.
Woo.
this is real bad. Fuck.
Yeah, and great time to be alive, to be a small child like Nestor. So Makhno's father died when he was very, very young. And it sounds like he bounced around a little bit, like he was fostered by another family, but he was like miserable. And so he like went back to his mom, who sounded like a little complicated too.
Yeah. I mean, listen, Makhno loved his mother, but even he said in his diaries, or not diaries, his recollections, my mother seemed to believe that she was the only person on earth who was allowed to beat me. Which, is pretty accurate. So he's fond of her and like deeply resents it when, Makhno or Nestor is working as a farmhand and works at a little bit of everything. And so when he's beaten by his employers, he gets, rather pissed off. There are a whole bunch of incidents like that.
So many
in this era.
Yeah. He works, and actually I found this period about his childhood really interesting, because there are a couple of things. One, and this is just, I think, my lack of knowledge, was he went to school alongside working. Whereas like in the United States, a lot of times people just didn't go to school. But he would like skip school to go like ice skating and stuff, which I think is really darling. Especially like getting to know him a little more through the book as an adult. Like the image of him as this like kid who's just like ice skating in Ukraine. It's really charming. Especially because, oh boy, did this man need therapy.
I think everyone needs
so
some therapy,
much.
Yeah.
Like I was reading this book, and as I was going, I was like, wow. He needs more. Okay. He needs even more therapy. This poor man. But he also worked, like you said, as a farmhand. And he was a bit of a theater kid.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
You want to talk about that? Because that's amazing.
So Nestor Makhno only had, I guess, the rough equivalent of like a middle school education. Because, you go to school and you work, but you can't do both forever. But one of the things he was very good at and very much enjoyed was signing up to work with the local theater troupe, which is, a fun thing where you basically get to dress up and use the vast power of your imagination. And Makhno was extremely good at this. And he was never like a tall or imposing fellow. So he would often get cast in the feminine roles and got very good at dressing up in drag. In effect, to do this. The reason I say this is because later on in the revolution, he would use this talent he learned in his childhood to go and like spy on enemy positions in person. Like, no, it's just me, old lady, definitely not Nestor Makhno. I've got a shawl, I'm hunched over. Oh, those look like some very intimidating artillery positions. Takes a little note there. Back to go over to where old ladies go, effectively. So he's very good at subterfuge on a personal level. And there are a whole bunch of incidents about this in the Revolution and the Civil War that follows it. So many that I couldn't list them all. And so I just sort of put it in the book as Makhno did this over and over again. If I put these into the narrative as they happened, the book will never get done.
Yeah, that was a lot of stuff. There's a lot going on around him.
All at once, forever.
So one thing I thought was interesting, especially that we are all in Pennsylvania, was that he went to work for Mennonites.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know about this, and I kind of want to just sort of take a step back and talk about like just sort of what's going on in the sort of social structure around Makhno as he's growing up, because there's a lot going on in that time frame. So we've got the Mennonites who are German speaking. I know they're German, but were they German speaking?
Yes, German speaking, very German inflected. They kind of held themselves as a people apart from ethnic Ukrainians. The backstory on that is basically slight digression. After Catherine the Great sort of absorbed Ukraine into the Russian Empire, she mostly depopulated vast swaths of it, and like, shit, I need people here or else I can't get like tax money and stuff. So like, you know, basically puts a big want ad. People who will live in, you know, southeast Ukraine, you get tax breaks, you get property, you can make alcohol, which is previously a state monopoly. And the Mennonites, who came from Central Europe, a lot of mostly German inflected, answered that, took her up on that deal, and formed what were called colonies, right? Mennonite colonies, which are, you know, large landholding estates that Makhno knew very well as a child. He worked on their farms, and perhaps, you know, to make it more interesting and perhaps less master-slave relationship, made friends with a lot of the Mennonite kids and like played with them. So he got to know them personally. This came in handy for if you were a childhood friend of Nestor Makhno's during the Russian Civil War on more than one occasion. Like, well, I know that guy. Back off. He's fine. We used to play
like, this guy's
tag.
cool.
Yeah. You get a pass. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there's a lot of really good scholarship on Makhno and the Mennonites in particular. The best of them, the absolute best. It's a book just talking about Makhno's relationship with the Mennonites is by Sean Patterson up in Canada. The book's called Makhno in Memory, and it examines these relationships and how the Makhnovists saw the Mennonites and how the Mennonites saw the Makhnovists. It's a very complicated and interesting picture that I am not qualified to get into, but that's an excellent book if you want to dig into it.
Yeah, I was really struck by that relationship with the Mennonite children, that there was that permeation, I guess you might call it.
Yeah, permeation is a great word for it.
Yeah, so you've got the Mennonites, you've got the peasants, obviously, and how much of an impact were like you had like more like larger land owning folks, but they weren't like as like there seemed to be this like bourgeoisie class that wasn't necessarily Mennonites.
Yeah,
am I right in that way?
Yeah, it could go, I think, either way. The Mennonites had a lot of political and economic power in their spheres. There was Ukrainian middle class, but like I talk about in the 1905 revolution, my treatment of it, they kind of work in concert, Mennonite or not, to help put down the sort of abortive first Russian Revolution, which is something that people remember come 1917.
I tend to. Yeah. So Makhno was like a bit of a rabble rouser from jump. So usually how I do this is I read the books, and then to get the like, especially for eras like this I don't know that much about, I'll use like Wikipedia just to get the this. And so I don't remember if this was in the book, but it made me laugh. I think it was that he led a little mini workers' revolt on one of the farms he worked on in 1902 because he like saw some kid getting beat up by the landlord's son and was like, no, we're not doing this. And he's like 14 or something at the time. Like I love it.
Yeah, that's broadly right. Again, the ability to talk about specifics is something I have to give entirely credit to, like Malcolm Archibald out of Edmonton, Canada, is responsible for translating whole libraries of Makhnovist-related stuff out of Russian and into English. And he actually translated some of Makhno's early writings where he talks about this. It's actually, Makhno doesn't start the uprising. The person being beaten is another one of the day laborers. And it's another laborer, Vanya, who Makhno kind of looks up to as like a big brother figure or a mentor, who's like, all right, what the fuck is this? And they pick up everything they can, anything sharp, pitchforks, hoes, not threshing stuff, and march on the house. The person who's beating the worker immediately flees when a bunch of people start arming.
Sure, yeah.
And they march on the house, and the landowner is like, whoa, what the fuck did you do? He's talking to his son, who is just
Yeah.
being an asshole. Like, whoa, we can talk this out. We can talk this out. He'll never do that again. I'll make sure of that. Let's calm it down now. And, this is more than the workers had expected. And, usually negotiation was not the first thing that the upper classes tried if you were insubordinate. But Makhno says in his writings that Vanya instructed him always to have something sharp within arm's reach, just in case someone ever tried that again. So don't let anyone ever hit you again. It was a rather formative or important experience with shaping Makhno's idea of direct action.
Yeah, and you definitely see that.
Yeah.
As you go forward. So we had the 1905 revolution, which is the one where the Tsar stays, but there's a Duma.
Yeah, the Duma.
Duma. Yeah, that he has to share power with.
So what is a Duma? Sorry.
It was like a advisory council, right?
Pretty much like Congress, but worse.
Okay. They were appointed, weren't they?
Yeah. So in the wake of the 1905 revolution, Nicholas does basically what the Bolsheviks do at the later stage of the revolution, or the Civil War, I should say, which is he cedes economic concessions from the revolution, but he gives almost no political ones. He creates the Duma, yes, but he has veto power over them, and they can't do shit about him. So they're not really his advisory. They're just kind of there to look good.
They're just hanging out.
And so, well, I mean, hanging out.
Yeah, no, I got, yeah.
Yeah. Hanging out, and the first couple propositions for the composition of the Duma were vetoed, and they were like, made up of people from all works of society. No. The upper class of society. Better. Tippity top of society? Perfect. Broadly speaking. And this is pretty much what the Bolsheviks do at the beginning of the third revolution, which is like put in the new economic policy, which, is like, congratulations, have some more capitalism. We'll give you merchant rights, but we won't allow other political parties or a free press or the right of workers to organize. We'll just make it slightly more tolerable and gamble that you'll be like, better than nothing, and off you go. In both cases, this kind of works and diffuses the revolutions enough to be contained.
For the moment, anyway.
Yeah. No, it's just a little 10-year timer on it.
Yeah, so Makhno gets involved with the anarchists eventually, sort of kind of wanders around movements, so ends up with the anarchists, and manages to get thrown in prison, connected to an assassination of an informant. And he's in there. He thinks he's going to be in there forever. Yeah. Like, he was going to be executed, and then they were like, you're really young. We're not going to do that.
Yes. This is a surprising thing that came up when writing this book, was that the Russian Empire, for all its many, many flaws, had a pretty generous, by our standards at least, definition of what made someone an adult or not. There were multiple anarchists who were caught up and due to be executed, and just like, you're too young. You're under 21. Can't give you the old drop. Makhno was picked up for planning to blow up a secret police station.
Right, that's what it was.
Yeah. No, dude, there's so much spy versus spy stuff in Makhno's life.
Oh my gosh, it's so complicated.
And to loop back to the theater kid thing, dressing up, it wasn't Makhno in the one of the assassinations of informers, which were everywhere, but some of his comrades did dress up in the clothing of the opposite sex just to get close enough to someone who knew them by sight. And then, aha! It's a very Bugs Bunny method of assassination.
I mean, if it works, it works.
I mean, it'll get your attention if you're looking through the history of the Russian anarchist movement, of how often dressing in the different clothes will do something for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot.
Russian theater is, the top of the line, so it kind of makes sense. a little bit.
Yeah. And they've got that anarchist DIY ethos.
Absolutely.
And so Makhno, he thinks he's gonna. This is what I think is so interesting. So he thinks he's gonna be in prison forever.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Shit. I forgot why I interrupted.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah.
Oh God, I didn't mention the bong incident. So Makhno's arrested. He's put in a local prison. He's in cuffs, katorga, which are about 8-pound weights on your ankles and your wrists, held together by a chain at your waist, and you're never taken off, which is super good for you, by the way.
Oh, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, no, it's like Peloton but more reasonable. Yeah, no one's ever bludgeoned someone else to the death with the Peloton that I'm aware of. Anyway, so he's in a local jail, and he's in with a bunch of other anarchists, and they start slowly, while their cases are being processed, making efforts to escape. They're filing through the bars. And things are going so well, and the end is in sight, that they're like, this is great. I think we can trade for a bong. We're just going to have a real, just great time in prison. And it's not that they're caught with the bong. It's that a guard notices that they're smiling a lot. And no one smiles a lot in prison. Not in my prison. Search the cell. Well, I found the bong, sure. But what they could, which is, I guess okay. But they couldn't disguise, like, yes, these files that are for medicinal purposes. All right, you can't really excuse that. So that doesn't quite work. And make sure that they are sent to a higher security prison somewhere else. Going from comic to very dark. Makhno doesn't know what his date of execution is. And so, like, a couple of his friends are just taken out and hung, seemingly at random. And what gets Makhno off the hook from the death sentence and onto the mere trifling sentence of life wearing 8-pound bracelets doing hard labor is his mother appealing to the local governor that her son deserved mercy and was not an adult when convicted. And this amnesty or this clemency came down very late down the line and saved Makhno's life, but also got him, well, not directly as a result of, but he's ultimately moved to Bertkia prison in Moscow. So he is not just out of Ukraine, he is very out of Ukraine. So even if he escaped, he knows no one. No one's going to help this weird South Russian, which is the Russian imperial term for people from Ukraine. Incidentally, when you read Makhno's memoirs, whenever someone says, yes, you're a South Russian, and you just sort of mentally hear Makhno say, Ukrainian. So it's a sort of like, if Makhno thinks you're an asshole, he'll record that you said South Russian. Like Lenin refers to him as this, and you just see, at least I imagine Makhno just going like, uh-huh. Yeah, no, sure, you could say that. Anyway, I've drifted from the point.
No,
Carry
not
on.
really, because it's kind of what I want to talk about is his experiences in prison. So it's obviously terrible because he's wearing these, 8-pound bracelets, and he was frequently ill, like super sick. Like he got didn't you get typhus at this point?
Oh, yeah. He got a punch card for lung diseases.
Yeah, he did.
So there's some interesting scholarship on this. The many diseases of Nestor Makhno is not a paper I'm aware of, but
maybe it should be because bro struggled. Yeah.
So Makhno didn't have super strong lungs for a bunch of reasons. Part of it is it's speculated. We talked about him playing hooky and falling in the Gaicho River while ice skating, right? Well, that's almost a hypothermia, baby. You only survived because your uncle lived nearby and, warmed you up. And big surprise, his mom beat the crap out of him for that. How dare you make me
I'm sure
worry.
that helped a lot with his lungs being
definitely
beat out
helped.
of him.
Archibald,
that's sarcasm, friends.
Yeah. Everyone knows the cure for hypothermia is beatings, obviously. I mean, who doesn't know this?
What a delightful parent.
But there's some literature, or Archibald found a document from a Russian prison, Malcolm Archibald, the translator I mentioned earlier, claiming that they, in the course of one of Makhno's prison sentences, removed an entire lung? Question mark? And Makhno doesn't mention this. And doesn't even say, there's this weird scar down my chest and I can only breathe half as well. So, seems like with no other evidence, I don't think it's true, but someone wrote it down.
That feels like something that would have come up.
That you would have noticed, maybe.
And also, like, I'm also just thinking of what medical care was like at that
Not
in
great.
that era, and just surviving an operation like that would be. I mean, it's impressive today.
Yeah.
When we're not like, you know, going from one patient and then sticking your dirty hands in the next one. Actually, this might be post hand washing.
No, this is, I think,
We're
germ
on the
theory is
cusp of it.
pretty well known, I guess.
Yeah, but like, there's germ theory and then there's hand washing.
You make a point there.
I'm not sure. We're in the transitional time, I think, via hand washing.
Yeah,
That might be entirely wrong. I'll correct it in post if I'm wrong.
I was wrong. Hand washing was first introduced in the West by Florence Nightingale in the mid-19th century. Although I will note that hand washing was not a thing during the American Civil War, which is where I got this from. But by this point, hand washing would have been pretty standard. It is sort of interesting tidbit, though. It didn't become officially required, I guess, in certain medical settings in the United States till the 1980s, although they certainly were washing hands before that. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled programming.
The great hand-washing, non-hand washing changeover.
I mean, it's important, man.
I mean, it ain't wrong.
But it's not all. Well, it's not all bad in prison. He meets Peter Arshinov, who is an important mentor, who pops up just like all the time. He just keeps popping up.
Yep.
And he learns a ton. Like, this is what I found really impressive, is that he thinks that he's in prison forever. He's in this really awful prison in Moscow. And he's, like, in book clubs.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the Bertkia prison in Moscow had, you know, according to Makhno and other radicals, specifically political prisoners, fucking great library. Really good. A lot of radical literature.
Yeah, like anarchist literature.
Oh yeah,
specifically.
No, this is where
so
Makhno
cool.
finds. This is where Makhno gets a hold of Mutual Aid by Kropotkin. Reads the crap out of it, and according to him and other people who were in jail with him, he would not shut the fuck up about it, and would like corner people in the hallway and like, "Have you read this? Let me tell you my feelings about this." And I'm like, I can relate. Kropotkin's fun.
We frequently on this podcast will think about like what historical figures, if they had today's like technology and stuff, what they would do, and 100% this man would have had a podcast.
Oh yeah,
like absolutely. And he would not be on Twitter because fuck Elon Musk.
yeah, that's
Well, fuck Elon Musk, and he probably just had too much to say. Like, I can't think. It sounds like he probably couldn't. He couldn't fit it all in 140 characters or however much we have.
Yeah. I don't know, because I haven't been on Twitter since
the event.
decades. No, way before the event. Yeah, this podcast does not have a Twitter, an X. Oh, I don't know. Whatever. Anyway. So he's in prison. He learns a whole lot about anarchy and other stuff. Didn't he like carry that book around with him?
Oh yeah.
Like, I just think that's so. There's so much about this man that is just so darling.
No,
Like, I just want to give him a hug at various points in his life.
Yeah.
And he would not accept. But
it's. I don't know. He might have been, especially in his youth, more of a hug it out sort of guy.
He might have been. He was. I loved how in the book you pointed out how emotional he was at various points. Because especially like, I know as an American, my perception of having grown up in this like post fall of the wall and like transitioning into Putin life, like my perception of Russians is very like that they're very serious and firm and like unemotional and mean and like all this stuff. And I love that you took the time to point out like actually what we're just transitioning into now, if I'm remembering it correctly, there's a lot of, and then so much happens in this man's life, so I'm 100% going to keep mixing up things that happened where, because it was a lot. But I believe this is one where he's released from prison, because all the political prisoners were released as part of the February Revolution in 1917.
Yep.
And he goes home and finds out that one of his brothers has died. His mother's house is destroyed. Did he think his mother had died too? I can't remember.
She
hadn't, but like
about a year later.
Okay.
A second trip from Moscow. But if we're talking about him getting out of prison, he comes back to a very much different hometown. Like, no one expects, in prison for life, you don't really ask, so when are you getting out, Nestor? Well, it does kind of say for life there. So Makhno himself writes in his diaries, I was like a man come back from the dead. Everyone seemed very surprised to see him and all the other radical prisoners that have been released. And so there's a lot of the old, I was a police officer when you were arrested. Good to see you, buddy.
And that was one of the moments, right?
This is one of the moments where Nestor Makhno has what is, I guess we would call now, a near nervous breakdown. This guy,
it sounded like a panic attack from your description.
Yeah. Nervous breakdown or a panic attack. This guy, Onyshenko, was a police officer, now former police officer, because February Revolution. But Makhno had beef with him because at one point in the past he had harassed Makhno's mom and struck her in the face. So that's a recipe for some bad times for you if you're Onyshenko. And so Onyshenko gives Makhno, passing him in the street, is very cheery, very false, very bright. Hey, how you doing, Nestor Ivanovich? And Makhno screams, get the fuck away from me, you scoundrel, or I'll put a bullet in you. And he goes for his gun. And Onyshenko's like, oh boy, and Makhno runs off and collapses in a cafe for quite some time, just traumatized out of his mind. He ultimately justifies him not shooting Onyshenko in the street by saying, listen, there are a lot of ex-police officers out there, and Onyshenko is among the least dangerous of them, and if we just go around killing people, the dangerous ones are going to get a lot harder to find. This is also the period they're going through old police stations and finding out which of their old friends and comrades had been informers. So it's a pretty emotionally charged time of like, this person who I always trusted them, turns out he was taking money to snitch on us. So there's a lot of emotional horror.
Yeah.
Even if that's the only thing that happened that year, that's a lot to go through. And it was not the only thing that was happening that year.
Yeah, and I really like, 'cause it's easy, I think in a lot of history books, as you and I both read, a lot of times there's a tendency to shy away from this sort of aspect of these things. Because he was, as we can continue going through his life, he was a badass, like universally. And it's really, I think, great to be like, he was a badass, and he had a nervous breakdown when he saw somebody who like traumatized him. Like that these are things that exist in the same person. I think it's really like fantastic to have in the book.
Yeah.
So he starts doing his thing, right? He comes back to I don't remember how to say it already.
Julia.
Thank you. We're just gonna use that. And
just make a loop.
Yeah. I love, it's very pretty looking on the page. Like I love seeing it written out. But he starts like doing his anarchy thing, right? Like he starts like organizing people and
Yeah.
It
depends on Makhno's memoirs are fascinating and also just frustrating for what he leaves out. He does start agitating and organizing. The People's Committee for the Defense of the Revolution is basically teams of peasants who go out to the landed estates with guns and a writ from the committee, basically disarming the middle class so they can't do what they did during the 1905 revolution, which is basically team up with the government to privatize land and keep the serfs down. And so there's a lot of confiscating of weapons, but they also give them an on-ramp. Like, listen, we're not completely against you. Like, if you have a 300-acre farm and you employed 20 workers to work it, during this expropriation, you would get an equal amount that all your workers are now getting, right? You'd have all you need to survive in rural Ukraine, like plow, horse, whatever, from the central thing. Like you can be integrated into the early revolutionary movement. What Makhno does not mention in the early part of this sort of proto phase is that he had been exchanging letters with a woman in Huliai, and they, when he got out of prison, got busy, hooked up, and she had a kid inside Huliai, and the child didn't live longer than a couple of days. And the woman left and lived to at least 1930, we know. I know her name's in the book, but it eludes me at the moment. But Makhno doesn't write about that. It is own autobiography. He doesn't really say much about this. So it's always interesting to see what people, when they write their own history, leave out. Like, no, the revolution was important. I also had a kid. But anyway, the revolution was happening.
Traumatizing.
It was super traumatizing, probably. I don't see how you just brush it off.
But I was really impressed. Like, throughout this, you can see Makhno trying to hold up to his ideals.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, the thing of, like, the previous landowners being like, listen, you can have the same thing everybody else has. And obviously a lot of them, as soon as they had opportunities to go back to the old way, did that.
Yep.
But like I like this idea that they were given the opportunity to do the right thing, essentially, even if many of them did not.
Part of the reason for this, I this is conjecture, but it seems the history argues that Makhno had been in prison or arrested plenty of times as a kid, and it wasn't always comrades who bailed him out. Like, more than a few times it was rich or middle class business owners who remembered the Makhno kid and like, yeah, I'll pay your bail. Don't do that again. Well, I'm gonna do it again, but thanks. So like, I think Sean Patterson's beautiful phrase for it is Makhno didn't view class as a fixed state, and definitely played that up in the early revolutionary period to try to get everyone on board. You gave me a wonderful transition point here.
Yes.
I'm going to take it.
Go for it.
So this sort of anarchist structure does very well, but we have to remember that World War I's kind of still going on.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we're in 1917.
1917. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, okay.
And this means that the German Mennonites are a little chummier, let's put it that way, or are believed to be a little chummier with the Austro-Hungarians, which are, German-inflected or German culturally people. So a lot of the landlords who run go to the Austro-Hungarians for guns, money, and training to go and get their estates back, which leads to some kerfluffles.
This is the beginning of it getting really complicated for a long time.
A lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, which we're not going to go through all of them, so we don't have time. But
one last thing before we proceed.
Yes, please.
Again, Patterson makes a very good point that not all the Mennonites who, by their religious code, are pacifists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, think of them, well, they're obviously different in a lot of principal respects, but the Amish are also pacifists, right?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, well, they're from the same trunk or whatever.
Same tree, yeah?
Yeah.
And so the Mennonites that went for the Austro-Hungarians' guns, money, and officers and troops were excoriated by a lot of Mennonite diarists, activists who said, oh, so you're a pacifist as long as things are going fine. But the second that someone offers you a gun to get your land back, suddenly our central religious teaching is nothing to you. So it's not a monolithic force. There's a lot of dissent for various reasons inside the Mennonite community once it starts.
And there's a lot of just through like the invasion of the Austro-Hungarians and just moving forward basically from this point. We've got a couple like primary actors that I want to point out. And my understanding of who they are. So we have the Anarchists, obviously, which tend to go by the Black Army or the Black Flag.
Yeah, they tend to use the Black Flag.
Yeah, Black Flag. And then you have the Bolsheviks, who are our friends Lenin, etc.
Yeah.
And they're the Red Army. And then you have Ukrainian nationalists.
Gross.
Who are the White Army.
Not quite.
Oh, okay.
No. You thought it was complicated? There's a whole other actor.
Oh, good.
Ukrainian nationalists are kind of, at least in the Russian Civil War, they're kind of opportunistic. They want autonomy and independence for Ukraine, but they don't think that like things like private property should be touched, or they're not against like, say, pogroms. Right?
Yeah.
Like Petluria is big into that. Or at least the Nationalist Army under Petluria was famous for it. The White Army is kind of the old Russian military caste, bourgeoisie, the Orthodox Church. Like, they're all the upper class from the old empire who want to wave back everything into a wave of counter-revolution. So it goes anarchist Bolsheviks, Ukrainian nationalists, White Army. Oh shit! Did I forget? I forgot someone. Oh yeah, and they're independent warlord bands that just want like
the
Grigoriev
and like the Cossacks and stuff.
yeah,
right?
there are a lot of
Cossacks,
Cossack
yeah.
bands that go back and forth depending on what they felt like and what's the best position.
Yeah. Speaking of pogroms.
Oh god, yeah, no, it's real fucking bad. Makhno, I'm happy to say, was one of the few forces in the Russian Civil War that would not ask questions but would shoot pogromists on sight.
Yeah, well, that's something I was impressed with him is, like, honestly, with this sort of time and place, if someone just didn't personally engage in a pogrom, I'd be like, good job. But he didn't, like, you get a cookie. But he didn't just do that. Like, he actively stopped pogroms.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's incredible, like, some of these moments you describe where it's like, it sounds like people are ready to go. Like, they're, like, liquored up and whatever.
Yeah.
And he just shows up and he's like, no, we're not doing this. Like, Jews are workers too. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And it seems like he was really a singular voice in that regard.
Yeah, he if we're tracking the roots of how Nestor thought about this, after he comes back from Moscow the second time, he meets Kropotkin. He gets to have a couple of hour meeting with his idol, and they get to chat. It's a wonderful heartwarming moment. And then the sort of shit sandwich he has to eat later is he has to go and talk to Lenin.
Yes,
which is just.
And Lenin pretended it didn't happen or something. Like,
we only have two sources for this, and one is Makhno, who, while he'll leave some things out, he's not a liar. He doesn't
lies
tend
by
to make
omission.
things out. Yeah, he'll leave things out, like the whole having a kid thing. But we have no reason to doubt this happened. Victor Sergei, who might be one of the more well-known anarchist writers from this period, also I think makes reference to Makhno meeting Lenin at one point or another. Anyway, that Lenin instructs the newly formed Bolshevik government to help Makhno get back into Ukraine to destabilize it because they'd given it away to the Austro-Hungarians at Brest-Litovsk, which is a whole separate discussion.
Yes.
Oh boy. But
right, and this is the one brother captured one.
Yeah, this is this is where things escalate, right? You thought it was bad before, and it only escalates higher from here.
Yeah, no, it keeps getting worse.
He finds out that his brother, I think Emelian, has been executed. His family farmstead burned, and his mother unhoused by the Austro-Hungarians. It's not great, and they're looking for him. He already has a bit of a reputation. One of his cousins is due to be executed by the Austro-Hungarians, if I remember right. And just the rumor that Makhno was nearby had them be like, well, you should cell doors open. We didn't see you. Give regard to your cousin. We saw nothing. Go with God, buddy. But Makhno also didn't dare go back into Huliy-Polyy immediately, and so was sort of staying in farmhouses and fields around there. And people write him letters, like a friend of a friend will pass it on to him, and he writes back. They ask him, hey, we think that the Jews were involved with helping the Austro-Hungarians take Huliy-Polyy. Should we get revenge? And Makhno's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because in the interim, while he was in Moscow, the Austro-Hungarians had taken Huliy-Polyy with help from the nationalists and all that sort of stuff. And Makhno basically writes back the equivalent of, what the fuck are you talking about? No! Underline 8 times. What is wrong with you? He writes that he thinks that anti-Semitism in that region, in this context, was an imposition from the outside, an attempt to divide the revolution against itself, which probably right.
Yeah.
Seems accurate.
I'm pretty sure that I'm descended from anarchists. It was always because you get all the family stories about, like, they were getting in trouble for having meetings in the woods and stuff, and then they came here and they were socialists. But, like, the way it was just like, no, we're socialists. We're socialists. It was just very, like, when I learned a little more about, like, the anarchist movement in like Eastern European Jewish communities, I was like, that's familiar. That's familiar. So I don't know, but I'm suspicious.
A strong
I have
suspicion.
to, I have to admit, I come from apparently communists and socialists who hated each other very deeply among my Jewish family, and now
Oh my God.
now they're libs, of course.
Yeah, well, as that's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of skimming over a lot of the like battle maneuvers, which are actually super. I highly recommend reading the book to get more like in depth with this because he's incredible. So it's around this time. So he helps reoccupy.
Julia.
Thank you. And I really like how he tried to encourage German troops to go home and start their own revolutions. Like I just
sort of
I love it.
the sort of principle during the Civil War, but also towards the end of the revolution, was anarchist bands, or at least ones that Makhno were involved with. The standard move was to shoot the officers, and if you could afford it, give the conscripted troops, the infantry or privates, money, sometimes even a train ticket home, and just be like, yeah, go on, get out of here, shoo. And they would do this with pretty much everyone they fought. Not all the time, obviously, but it was common enough that you could predict officers. But enlisted men, go home. You're fine. We don't have a beef with you. You didn't want to be here.
Yeah, well, it's that class solidarity above all else.
And it can be pretty effective. They got a lot of deserters because of this from both the Red Army, especially from the Red Army.
Well, yeah, and that kind of kept them afloat for a little while.
Oh, yeah.
Because so they retake it. He gets the moniker Batko.
Yep.
Which means father.
Yep.
Which I just love. You look at pictures of him from this era, and he's like so little and young looking, and people are calling him Batko, and he has like that big furry hat. Like I just love it.
Yeah.
So this is when we have a lot of, like I said, we're skimming over a lot of the military stuff because it's just would take forever and it's really, really interesting. But the thing that I thought was most notable to me was all of this going back and forth with the Red Army. Because one thing I thought was really, I live in West Philly, so I'm around a lot of people that are like, revolution! And I really was impressed by Makhno being like, thinking about the steps along the way to get to where we want to be, which sometimes meant teaming up with the Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
Which didn't work out super well for him, but I appreciate the attempt.
Yeah. There's some suspicion, at least I've always quietly held, if anyone but Trotsky had been in charge of the Red Army, it might have turned out differently. My least favorite guy in this whole thing, old Leon Trotsky, is the guy responsible for turning the Red Guard, who were basically volunteer militias, like workers' councils, neighborhood, basically larger scale affinity groups that began in 1917 at scale in the cities that successfully defend Petrograd and all that sort of stuff. So takes it from a volunteer force into a 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's a conscript army, baby. Back with the old hierarchical systems, different ranks, different pay, political commissars inserted into it, which is always a very good sign. And so Trotsky is put in charge of this new Red Army, which draws from all the old satellites of the Russian Empire. It should be, I don't like being fair to Trotsky, but I will. Later in the war, the Makhnovists would use conscription as well, but it's hardly the same thing. Their military structure is different.
Well, and maybe this is me mixing up things again, but wasn't also part of it is that they would move people to different parts of the empire. Yep. So it took away their base of influence.
Yep. Exactly right. When the anarchists first meet the Bolsheviks, the worst variation I've ever heard of, When Harry Met Sally, was, I believe, spring and summer of 1919. The Austro-Hungarians are gone at this point. They've fucked off. The anarchists had a pretty strong hand in that from their regions. But they understand that the Bolshevik general tactic is to take independent groups or different political affiliations, put them under the auspices of the Red Army, and then station them somewhere far away from their home base. So you can't desert, you can't fight your way back home, and all your bases of support will be destroyed or co-opted while you're in the Red Army. So one of the conditions that the anarchists insist on in their mass democratic condition-making meetings, which are like thousands of people, is that the Black Army, which is a nice shorthand term for the Insurrectionary Revolutionary Army of Ukraine, and then in parentheses Makhnovist, which does not roll off the tongue.
No.
So Black Army is easier. One of their conditions, the deal breaker would be, we cannot be removed from the front against Denikin, who's the White Army general. So they can't be moved from their region, and that they were willing to not join the Red Army if that thing wasn't agreed to. And it doesn't go well. Trotsky and Makhno hate each other on sight. I could talk about Pavel Dubenko, who is just like the worst version of Forrest Gump on the Bolshevik side. Like, he knows everyone, but he keeps screwing things up constantly. He was put in charge of the Red Army in Ukraine just because he was such a pain in the ass to Lenin, and he had a Ukrainian last name. So we figured, it'll be fine. Just put Pavel Dubenko in there. It'll be... Jesus, just not here, please. But yeah, so they do join up with the Red Army, but it becomes very clear that the Bolsheviks are not seriously interested in giving the anarchists, who keep their own banners, keep their own elected officer system, keep their sort of more egalitarian ethic. They're not interested in actually giving them guns. They give them, I think, 3,000 Italian Martini rifles, which I'm not a gun nerd, but I have gun nerd friends, and I'm like, these things are ridiculously fiddly, and they don't even make the same sort of bullets, very specific bullets for them. These are just old bolt action things. And even then, they weren't in wide use, so they might have just said, here, have these 3,000 ornamental brooms. You can sweep your way across the battlefield. And
and its ammunition was a huge issue.
Yeah, huge. They never had enough ammo.
Especially once the Bolsheviks go back on their word several times.
Several times. A couple of times by omission, like putting the Black Army in a position where they'll take the most casualties or withdrawing support from them. And it gets to be too much. Trotsky is famous for losing the Ukraine a second time to the White Army, almost. He writes a famous telegram of, there's no chance in hell that Denikin's White Army could possibly...
Yeah, when they showed up, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
I thought we were done with these guys.
Yeah. No. He writes a telegram saying, the Ukraine is under no threat from Denikin, and then next day, oh shit, I have to abandon Rostov, the White Army's here. Second telegram. Whoops.
Oops.
Anyway, so they abandon the anarchists, and Makhno in turn ultimately breaks off his alliance with the Red Army because he knows which way this is going, which means that he has to fight the Reds and the Whites kind of at the same time.
And this is, I think, the moment when, I mean, he was impressive up to this point, but I thought that this last like moment that you had that picture in there of like Makhno, like sort of from like the Soviet archives of him like making his way around the region. He like just the hit and run, just the military tactics of not having enough anything. But he still like was incredibly successful. Like in the end, obviously we know how this goes. In the end, he lives in exile, but like the amount of time that he just hung on there is incredible. Especially like he was sick again. They're like carrying him around on like a cart. Like,
oh my God. Yeah. No.
He gets shot in the stomach and he's like still like commanding troops. Like this guy.
Yeah, no.
Oh my goodness.
He gets, I think the count is 12 major wounds in the course of the Russian Civil War, ranging from a pretty, from the safety of someone who's never had a horrible facial scar, pretty bitchin' scar across his cheek, to just cuts and gunshot wounds everywhere. So 12 plus, of course, in 1919 there was a giant typhus outbreak that killed about 2 million people. He got that. I think it was typhus.
I think it was typhus.
Yeah.
I feel like in this era, if you're not sure about an illness, if you guess either typhus or tuberculosis, you'll probably be right 75% of the time.
Yeah, and tuberculosis is what ultimately does him in, right? He was definitely, he wasn't bad at strategy, but he definitely didn't like leading from behind. And there often
Which honestly
wasn't.
Good for him, man.
Yeah, there often weren't enough troops to lead from behind anyway, so everyone's
when
involved.
You say not enough troops, like, for the people at home who have not read the book yet, you should read the book. We're talking like hundreds, against like army-sized armies, and they would win. Yeah,
their general principle seemed to be that attacking's not a bad idea, and if you have the advantage in cavalry and tachanka, which are basically horse carts with, you just staple your old heavy machine gun on the back there, you have kind of the first sort of proto-tactical, and off you go. It doesn't matter that there's not any ammo for the heavy machine gun. Are you going to bet that the horse cart with the heavy machine gun barreling toward you just happens to not have machine gun? I'm going to be running this way, please.
And also has the commander on it who's been shot again, but he's still going.
He doesn't seem to notice.
He's still going.
Yeah.
So eventually, though, there's only so long this can go on.
Yeah.
Lenin orders Makhno liquidated, which we've skipped over all the many, many times people have tried to assassinate Makhno.
Oh, yeah.
My personal favorite being the one where they invited him to, like, dinner.
A fancy dinner.
And poisoned the food, and it didn't work.
2 different types of poison. Yeah, this is Polonsky.
Yeah.
To add sort of salt to the wound, Mikhail Polonsky is someone Makhno is known for a while.
That also seems to come up a lot too. Like people he knew and maybe even liked at some point.
Yeah.
Try to kill him. Like so often.
A whole bunch of times.
Like
so Polonsky joined the Bolsheviks kind of late, went back, joined the Makhnovists, and orchestrated this poisoning plot with his wife, who was a professional actress, and a bunch of other people, but their plan was found out by the anarchist counterintelligence. So they knew it was coming. The poisoning, surprise, did not work because you don't eat food that's been laced with strychnine.
Not if you can help it.
But this actually is a bit of a scandal in the sense of, all the conspirators are rounded up and they're to be taken to counterintelligence headquarters, but surprise, surprise, they're not. They're taken out and shot by the side of a river.
Yeah.
And what Makhno gets put on probation for and brought up before the anarchist councils for is that he had the paperwork forged to say that they were tried, convicted, we found poison here, and they were executed with due process, basically, which was absolutely not the case. There wasn't enough time to confirm that everything had been poisoned. And it's a really tense meeting because, like, as we talked about, Makhno, high-strung guy. We have Belash, who's one of our sources, and Volin, who's a anarchist writer, who actually makes it to Paris with Makhno, and they have a long, acrimonious relationship, are both on the panel, and they're like, hey, this executing people out of hand thing is kind of a not cool thing to do. Don't lie about the paperwork. And Makhno tries to pull his gun on them and has to be like wrestled out of the room. Volin calls Makhno, I think at this point, according to Belash, a Napoleon, which is what you would call people before Hitler was around, and a drunk, which is a pretty sick burn, considering. So there's this sort of authoritarian creep that comes with being in a civil war, which is like the worst possible thing that can happen because your trust in other people, even people you've known, starts to get sort of like acid washed away, and Makhno starts taking increasingly personal control of things. Even for, an avowed anarchist, there are these outside pressures that shape your behavior in ways that, your pre-Civil War self would be like, yo, what the fuck, man?
Yeah, I mean, you can tell there's definitely this cult of personality thing.
Yeah,
that is happening.
A danger then and a danger now.
Yeah.
I think.
So he he has to flee Ukraine,
Yeah.
which is in of itself. Every part of this man's life is a wild story. But he bounces around a little bit. He ends up in Romania. But in the end, he ends up in Paris, which sucks.
Yeah.
He hates Paris.
Not very nice if you're there as a refugee.
He didn't speak the language. He only spoke Russian and a little Bulgarian, right?
Russian and Bulgarian, baby.
He tried to work in a factory, but he was too sick. He was homesick, and he actually fell into a really gnarly depression.
Oh yeah.
And tried to die by suicide.
Yeah. Even just getting to Paris was a miracle. Yeah. No. He tries to kill himself twice before he even makes it there, and both times he's saved by emergency services. The second time, I think he breaks himself out of the hospital because he's terrified of the Cheka, who are not around, finding him in a weakened state, even though this is, I think, in Danzig in Germany.
The Cheka, just because we haven't mentioned them yet, are secret police.
Yeah, secret police. Not your friends. Not now or ever, ideally.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's vicious depression on his part. I think the bright parts of his life are his daughter Yelena, who he absolutely adored. Ida Met said that he would fall into intense recrimination whenever he had to smack his daughter for being naughty. He's like, "Oh no, what have I done?" I'm like, "That's."
I read that and I was like, "You could try not hitting her."
What if I told you that you could skip those steps?
Oh, early 20th century.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah, and a big part of this moment in his life in Paris is also helping to write the platform.
Yep. Which
I found deeply fascinating on several levels, not knowing nearly as much as I should about anarchist history, of that he was the problem with the anarchist movement is that every individual place, it's slightly different. We should have it all be the same, and that would be more marketable.
Mm-hmm.
And on the one hand, I'm like, I mean, sure, but also isn't part of the point that individual places have their own ways of doing things and it works for individual communities? But apparently I wasn't the only one who thought this was weird, because after this comes out, a lot of heavy hitters are like, what is this?
Yeah.
Goldman, I think,
Yep.
was like, no.
Berkman too.
Yeah.
Our girl Molly Steimer, who my illustrator is a huge fan of and can talk all day about, definitely comes out against it. Basically, Makhno and Arshinov, if you may remember him from earlier.
Yeah, I do. He's popping up.
Yeah, no, he's like a fungus. Basically argue that the anarchists have been out-organized and that they need to have a central committee and they need to agree on the following lines and policy positions, and for everyone else who'd lived through the Russian Civil War and escaped the Bolsheviks, they're like, oh, so you just want to Bolshevize anarchism, was their take. And to be fair to Makhno, the first edition of the platform did suffer from really bad translations. So that doesn't help you, even if you believe as Berkman and Goldman and Steimer and even Malatesta did, that this is a fundamentally mistaken assumption. A bad translation will make your response a lot harsher. So, there's that sort of early platform, anarchism as a political party, energy to it. And it's also just a bad time for it. Paris in 1920s and 30s is lousy with, so you got the regular cops, you got the Chekists that are definitely there and can infiltrate. You've got just general repression where anything seen as against French national interests was taken as proof of whatever, and you're deported back to your home country where you're usually not welcome. So the early platform is not great. Makhno did not do himself any favors by repeatedly picking what I guess you could call analog flame wars with other anarchists. At
one point, didn't somebody say you need to stop?
Mm-hmm. Berkman writes to writes a circular and then just pastes it everywhere, telling Makhno to lay off Volin. Oh my God, we have so many bigger problems than your beef with Volin, who you're yelling at for being too much of a man of letters and not enough of a man of action, right?
Yeah, it just You can really see like how like just in that sort of thing. Not that he wasn't high strung and high tempered before that, but like you can really see it coming out.
Oh yeah, no, he
as like time goes on and he's like getting more and more ill and like is just miserable.
Yeah, it's Paris is not a great city for Makhno. The kind of unkindest part of this part of his life is it's so similar to his childhood. Yeah. But worse, right? In his childhood, he could understand what's going on. He doesn't like it, but like he's not cut off from the world in the same way.
Yeah, and then unfortunately he does pass away at the age of 43 from tuberculosis or complications of tuberculosis because there was some like malnutrition stuff going on too.
Yeah,
wasn't
no,
there?
he was
was
so
not eating
young.
well.
This all happened in not as long of a period of time as I thought.
I know, right? Nope. Like, what if I like if you go to the Wikipedia, they actually like usually Wikipedia will be like summer of whatever, like when they talk about like timeliney stuff. Yeah. For Makhno, they say the exact month because you can't say summer of 1917 because so many things happen between July and September. Wow. Like,
oh yeah, no, you have to be hyper specific with Makhno.
Yeah, and I really liked how you kind of wrap the book up, which I think is a good place to wrap up here too, is sort of the legacy of Makhno. Because here in the U.S., I think a lot of us don't really know who he is. I mean, I sure didn't. But he's especially as the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues, he's become something of I mean, he was a figure before that, but right. I think even more so. Like he's got a statue. You said you have a coin with his face on it, which I'm sure he would love. Absolutely. That would be great. That's sarcasm. He would hate it very much.
Yeah.
It's sort of the Che Guevara-ization of Makhno. What would you say would be like the important things to take from his legacy and from this, you've taken this very like complex, broad life and made it into this digestible place. Like, what should people be taking from Makhno's life?
I think the best thing that can be taken, or among the best things amongst our weaponry, are such diverse elements as the sort of to resist the impulse to make him or anyone else really into a hero. I don't think that that's a helpful framework for doing practical anarchist or generally progressive things. There's a sub-theme in the book about by having heroes we betray ourselves. And I think Makhno, despite his very much love of both the spotlight and of doing the thing, would probably agree with the construct of a hero is detrimental to us acting in the way that we know to be right, in a very fundamental way.
Yeah, and I like that. I like how it fits in with the title "No Harmless Power," which comes from another thing that I forgot.
No, that's Makhno.
That's Makhno, right? So like this idea that like, especially as we talked a little bit about how like he went from being, I mean, he never, I don't think, stopped being an idealist, but like the Civil War wore on him.
Yeah, a lot.
And he started doing things that, less than a decade before he would have been like, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. And I think that's an important lesson to take. So I definitely agree. And I think your book does a really good job of like de-heroifying him. Like he is not deified at all in this book. And I think that's really important with all historical figures. He's very much a man in this. And I really like that. So I definitely recommend to everybody pick up No Harmless Power by Charlie Allison from PM Press. In the closer I'm going to record on my own when I edit, I'll have more details. But we are going to have a giveaway. I have 2 copies of this book to do a giveaway on social media.
Do you want them signed?
Yes, please. I was going to ask, but I was like, I shouldn't just say that on the mic, because then if you're like, nah, I'd be like, oh, well, never mind, not signed.
Local author refuses to autograph their own book.
Listen, you don't know. People are weird.
You never lose money betting that people are weird.
Yeah. So yeah, there'll be information forthcoming, if not already out, about how you can get your hands on this book with its beautiful artwork.
It's so gorgeous.
Like, it's really great. Fantastic job. There's so many other things I want to talk about with it, but we are going to get kicked out in 5 minutes. So, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh,
Thank
did you
you
want to
so
plug
much.
anything else? Sorry.
No, besides continue listening to D-Listers of History. It's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
I love it to little
Yay.
pieces.
Thank you so much for listening to D-Listers of History. If you enjoyed yourself, be sure to subscribe and drop us a review on whatever platform you listen on. A huge thank you to April Keys for the use of the song Misfit from her album Mountain View. You can find her on all the various social media platforms. And speaking of social media, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at D-Listers of History, no hyphens. And if you head over to our Instagram sometime today, Monday, when this comes out, there will be information about the contest to win a copy of No Harmless Power by Charlie Allison. If you're not already friends with us on Instagram, go ahead and friend us and post a picture of you enjoying the podcast or whatever you like that's podcast related with the hashtag D-Listers of History, and you'll be entered into that contest. There'll be more information, like I said, on Instagram. A big shout out to the folks supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support us and get access to all sorts of exclusive content, become a patron of the program. All of this and more can be found on our website, dlistersofhistory.com. Again, no hyphens, smush that together. We also recently opened a merch store, which you can also access from the website. And now for an episode relevant audio drop.
Кони вёрст рвут наметом, нам свободу